Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. Gathering or harvesting is a huge trope in RPG games or MMOs, where you can walk around, you can go up to a certain object like a tree or a mine or rocks, some fields, anything. You can lean down or, get an axe and start going to town and gathering or harvesting items. It's such a key thing, it boosts your skills, it's a great way to get loot, it's often not really OP or anything. So in today's tutorial, we are going to make it so we can walk around to these flowers, but only the specific ones, and we can start harvesting them. I think this will be a cool little trope for the game. It will add some extra functionality to the game that people will enjoy playing. So let's get started. So I have my pretty much port town here, and we can put a bed of flowers somewhere, and you go down, you pick it up, and that's pretty much it. It'll give it you. Now you could realistically put it on every single piece of grass and everything, but that's a bit too much for this video, I think. So I'm only going to do specific ones. So like I might put some specific flowers near this water. So like in Skyrim, you'll come and get the Nim root and stuff like that. So I think I'll put a couple of them around this bridge area here, and they'll basically each be a blueprint you can go and harvest on. So to get started, the key thing for this tutorial is I'm going to be using the narrative interaction plugin. If you don't have it, I will try to guide you when and where you need to plug your interaction into it. But the key point of it will be when we start the interaction, then the blueprint will disable the player, will play an animation, and when we release the key, then the player will be allowed to continue again. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my blueprints folder, I'm going to right click, new folder, and I'm going to call it gathering. Because we might have multiple different things, like we might have a Nim root, we might have a tree, a stone, whatever. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a blueprint class. I'll select the type of actor and I'll call it BPA_gathering. And the reason we're calling it BPA is just like we do for most things, we're going to put most of the settings on here, which will be generic, but then we'll make child classes of this. So if you ever want to reuse it, the option's there. So BPA gathering will do all sorts of gathering, but the child classes will do, say, the tree, the mine, the flowers, stuff like that. So if I come into class settings, I'm just going to tick abstract and click compile and save. And now that we've done that, our abstract class cannot be dragged in anymore because we must make a child component of it. I'm going to simply right click, create child, and I'll call it gathering_blue flower because that's the type of flower I've got that you can go and pick up. And I'm going to open this up. I'm going to come and add a static mesh for the actual flower, and then somewhere in one of my packs I believe I have a blue flower that I want to use. So it's this blue flower here, so I'm just going to allocate it like so. For efficiency, I'm actually going to come and disable the collision on these flowers. I'll search for collision and I'm just going to go no collision, no, and untick. I'll also disable the nav mesh because it doesn't really matter. And you might be thinking, well, surely we need some collision for the interaction to work, and you are right, we do. But what I'm going to do is just add a much simpler box collision. Something a lot smaller, a lot more lightweight, and it doesn't really matter if it's so clear on this one. But on this one, I still don't need it to affect the navigation because if the NPCs walk through it, it's a flower, they do all the time anyway. If it was like a tree, that would be slightly different, sure. And in this case, I'm also just going to come down and set the collision presets to block all. And I can compile and save. So now, if I come down to the edge of my bridge, where these flowers will typically be next to the water, I can pretty much drag my blueprints in. So I can just randomly come and add these just around the bridge, just where it needs to be, because then the quest later and the dialogue will be like, oh, it grows on the edge of riverbeds kind of thing. Something like that. I could probably work up a dynamic spawner as well to make it look nicer and stuff. But for now, I think this is pretty good. I'm going to drag it up, just tap the end key just to make sure they're all touching the floor. There we go. So now you can come down and you can see the blue flowers here. I could put some elsewhere, but that's level building and a bit outside of this tutorial for now. So how do we actually work on the gathering and the picking up? So this is where I'm going to move over to the narrative interact tutorial part. But if you have your own interact, what you basically need to do is have a way of detecting this gathering abstract blueprint, and then you can tell it when to start and stop gathering. Because what we'll do is when you start gathering, we'll play the animation of picking, and when you let go of gathering or end gathering, then it stops the animation, gives controls back to the player. The narrative interaction plugin will allow me to do this in a single class file, but what you can do is easily, if you fire a line trace out and you detect this gathering, just have a couple of events on here of begin gathering, end gathering. gathering. So for the narrative interact part, I'm going to come over to my blueprints folder and I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it interactions. So what I'm going to do is come into my content drawer and into my narrative interactions folder. I'm going to right click and I'm going to do blueprint class. I'll set the type to be a narrative interactable component. I'll click select and I'm going to call it interactable_gathering and I'll open this up. So I'll delete the events off and the process is going to be pretty simple. When the player presses to start gathering, as long as they hold it, the player will continue gathering. As soon as they let go, it will stop gathering. That's the way I'm going to pretty much go around it. The other way you could do it, if you don't want to do it that way, if you want them to just press it once, like go, and if they press it again, it stops, or if they move away or something, is you could do it based on interact mixed with focus out. So on interact, they play the animations. On focus out or something like that, you could make it cancel. The alternative way is you could just make it so if they interact once, it begins. If you interact again, it checks if it's already began. There's loads of different ways of doing it. So for mine, I'm going to override the on begin interact and then the on end interact. So on the on begin interact, so this is where we'll start the gathering process. So what I'm going to do is add a new variable called b gathering, and then I'm going to come in on the in begin interact and set is gathering to true, just like that. And then on end interact, I'm going to come and also untick it like so. So now we've got a way of detecting whether we're gathering or not. And if you've installed narrative interact in the way the tutorial suggests, then you will have a function what looks a little bit like this, which basically says on started of your interact key, it begins, on completed or cancelled, then it ends. This means we can also hold the key down to detect the begin, and when we let go, it will detect the end, which is perfect for what we want. So the key to this one is I'm going to use event tick on here. Now I know normal people don't like the event tick, which is completely fine, but what we can do with this one is we can actually use it to our advantage. If you select class defaults at the top, you can actually choose how often the tick runs. So what I'm actually going to do with mine is I'm going to set mine to run every 3 seconds. So whilst you're harvesting, it'll go click, 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 3 seconds, you'll gather one item. That's what I'm going to do. But as a bonus, what we can do on our interactable gathering to make it more generic is I'm going to add another one called gathering time, and I'll set it to a float. And then I'll make it instance editable with the eyeball. And then what we can do is we can drag off of here and do set component to interval, which will set that amount, and I can drag the gathering time into it. So what it'll do is when we start interacting, it will set the gathering time for this interact, which also means you can also change the gathering time outside of it. So if your player's not proficient enough in gathering plants or trees, you can adjust the gathering time to make it longer, which is really nice touch. I'll just hit compile and give it a default time of 3 just so I don't forget, because otherwise we're going to get an infinite amount of items super. And then on tick, this is where we actually now have our timer built in for us, built into Unreal without having to do anything special, which will automatically give us our items. So off of this, I'm going to drag off and do a branch, and I'm going to add in the bee gathering here, like so. So if it's false, then we're not gathering, it doesn't really matter. So the reason we're doing it this way is if it's true, then we are gathering it. If it's false, then we shouldn't be gathering it. But if it's false, we don't want it to be ticking, because then this actor will be ticking all the time. So what I'm actually going to do is above here on begin interact, I will do set component tick enabled, and I'll tick it as true. And then on the false down here, I will just disable it again. So what this is going to do is instead of this event tick running all the time, even when you're not gathering, it will only run when you're gathering. Nice and simple. The Boolean technically isn't needed, but it's a nice little safety check just in case for some reason something else makes this tick. Then if you're not gathering, it will be fine. So the next bit we need is to actually start giving the player the items. So I am going to use the narrative inventory because that's what inventory plugin I have. If you have your own plugin, that's completely fine. Just give the player the items here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to store the interactor as a variable so we can access it again later. So I'm just going to promote this interactor to a variable and just keep it called interactor. So if you've got a multiplayer game, this will tell you specifically who's interacting with it. But the other benefit of doing it this way is NPCs can also use interactions, meaning the NPC could walk up and interact, gather this flower or something if you really wanted to. And then what we can do down here is I can drag the interactor off and I can do get inventory component from target. That's how I get my inventory. And then I can simply do add item. Try add item from class. I'll connect that to the true. And the item class I will promote to a variable. And then if you really want to, you can promote the quantity to a variable. But typically, if you mine something, you only get one anyway. So I'll also promote the quantity to a variable just in case, but chances are I'll probably stay at 1. And then I'll make sure all of these user instance editable except the interactor. We can actually just mark that as private because that only really needs to stay in here. And I'll also move it to a private category just so it's out of the way. There we go. So I'll set the quantity by default to a 1, so it already is just in case. There we go. So that is actually a good chunk of the work. We've still got some finessing to do, but for now we should theoretically be able to try it. I'm going to come back to my BPA gathering here and I'm going to add our new gathering interactable there. And I'm going to compile and save and just leave it as is. But I'm going to come back over to the gathering blue flower so we can now customize it. I'm going to come up and I'm going to say, firstly, we don't need gathering to be visible. That's another private variable. So I'll move it into private. I'll tick it private as well. And it doesn't need to be instance editable because gathering is private to this. Secondly, we'll come back. Gathering time 3 seconds to gather some flowers. Yeah, I'll say that's fine. The item class, I don't have an item for this yet. So let's go and quickly make one. So again, I'm using the narrative inventory. If you're using your own, make whatever you want. I'm going to say it's a narrative item. I'll just say NI blue flower. And then when I come up with a better name, we will name it. The pickup mesh, I will literally just make it this one. I don't have a thumbnail for it yet, so we'll just leave that for now. The display name, I will call it blue flower. The description, a blue flower often used in crafting and with basic herbalism can be used to heal. There we go. So it's giving a little bit more lore to our game. We've got the option to have health upgrades and stuff like that. And everything else I will just keep as default. And I can compile and save. And then I can come back to my gathering blue flower, click my interactable, and now I can set the item to my blue flower. Quantity will be just 1 because that's how much you'll get each time. Interaction time, we're going to keep it 0 because we don't want the player to have to hold the key to get the item, then it ends the interact. We want this to press and hold it and it continuously interacts with it, which is why we're keeping the interaction time to 0 because otherwise it will only call begin interact once and we don't want that. Interactable name will be blue flower and the interact will not be interact, it'll be gather. There we go. We can compile and save. For nicety, we can also come back over to the interactable gathering, click class defaults, and we can just set the action text to gather as well because everything's probably going to say gather. There we go. So in theory, we can try it now and we should be able to run to these blue flowers and start gathering them. So now you'll see if I come down to this flower here, if I look at it, if I tap E, nothing will happen. But if I come and hold E after 3 seconds, I think a few more than 3 seconds have passed. If I go to my inventory, you see I have now received a blue flower. How cool is that? If we count it up, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, check the inventory, we now have 2 flowers. There we go, ladies and gentlemen, a super basic gathering system. And of course, there's so much more we can do to it. So let's do some more. So what if you want these flowers to sort of be destroyed after you've gathered so many? Like, we're not going to go into a flower spawning system, but say maybe a flower has 5 items. So once you've gathered 5, it needs to disappear, you know, be destroyed kind of thing, or become inactive, you change the mesh, something like that. So what I'm going to do is come back to my interactable gathering, and I'm going to add a new variable to this one called quantity available, and I'll set this to an integer. I'll set it as instance editable, compile, and I'll set the default to 5. So we can only get 5 items from this one. And then at the end of triad item from class, what we can do is we can grab the quantity available. We can do minus minus to decrement it, which if you don't know what decrement does, it simply is a shorthand way of grabbing the variable minus off of it, adding 1, and then setting the variable again. De-increment just simply sets the variable and takes a single 1 off. It's a nice little shorthand. Then what we can do after this is we can say if it's less than or equal to and add a branch like so. So if it's less than or equal to 0, meaning it's run out of the quantity available, then we can simply just call on end interact. So I'm going to take this true up to here just so it disables it like so. I might even bring this over here a little bit. So if it's true, we basically need to call on end interact. So I'm going to take these two here. I'm going to right click and do collapse to function, and I will call it end gathering. And then if you let go, it will end gathering. Else, if it hits true, it will end gathering. However, before we end the gathering and basically say don't tick anymore, we should really tell the flower we've finished with it. So I don't want to tie this interactable gathering to the BPA gathering because then every time a gathering is available, it needs to have the gathering in memory. It's tying them both together and it's needless. So what I'm going to do actually is come to my interfaces folder and I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new interface called BPI underscore gathering, and I'm going to open it up. So we're going to add one function simply called update gather amount, and then on here I will add an input of gather amount. And if you have a flower that the more you harvest, like Tiberium from Command & Conquer, it disappears over time, I'm going to make it so this one has an update ready to tell you I've changed the amount, so you can take it down if you want. And I'll hit compile and save. The reason we're doing it this way instead of just saying gathering has finished is if you want something to decrease in size or something like that over time, like Tiberium in Command & Conquer or Skyrim, the mines, they'll disappear the more you do. So this way it gives gives us the option to do this as well. It's more flexible. So I'll come to BPA gathering and I'm going to implement this interface. So I'll click class settings, implemented interfaces, and I'll type BPI gathering. It will then give me the update gather amount, which I can just double click to implement here. And on the parent, I'm not going to do anything because I might want the gathering to be different. Flowers and picking things, yes, they'll just disappear and we'll destroy them. But a tree, you might want to actually fall down, break into logs like in the forest. So to make it more flexible, I'm simply going to go and do it on the blue flower. I'm going to come to the event graph. I'm going to double click this interface here, update gather amount. I'm going to right click it and do add call to parent function. So just in case we do anything specific on the parent, we've got the option to use that as well. But what then I'm going to do after this is simply drag off this gather amount and say if it's less than or equal to 0, then I'm simply going to destroy it like so. And I can hit compile and I can hit save. So what this should do now is when we call this interface here, if it's less than 0, it'll destroy it. And then equally, what you could do on false is start decreasing the size of it. Actually, let's do that anyway, because that sounds quite cool. I'm going to drag the static mesh in, and I'm going to make the box alone so the collision box doesn't change size. And I'm going to drag off the static mesh. I'm going to set scale. I'm going to set relative scale 3D, and I'm going to connect it into the false. So the way we're going to calculate the scaling is by using a lerp node. I'm going to add in lerp vector. And what a lerp node does is it allows us to choose a value between 0 and 1, and it'll go 0, it'll be the A value, and 1, it'll be B. And it'll do all the logic to work out in between. So what I'm going to do is set the minimum size to be 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. So it shrinks down to 0.1, and then after that, it's going to be destroyed. And the max size to be 111. And then the alpha, we just need to calculate based on how much we've actually got from the gathering. So if I drag off and do quantity available, then what we need to do is somehow convert quantity available over to a 0 to 1 value. Because at the moment, quantity available is 5, it could be 100. So what I'm going to do is right click and choose a map clamped range. And then what this does, it will do all the conversions for us. So I can plug the return value into the alpha. But the value is our current value, which will be quantity available, and it will convert it to a float for us. So that's all good. Next, our outrange A to B between 0 and 1. So we know that's all good. And the next thing, we need to actually remember how much is available so we can do the logic as it counts down. So in this blue flower, because this is where I'm doing the scaling one, I'm going to add a new variable called max quantity available, and I'm going to set it to a type of integer. And then I'm going to add in up here event begin play, and I'm going to set the max quantity available to the quantity available. So as soon as the game starts, it sets the quantity available there. We can come into the max quantity and tick private as well, because nothing else but this blueprint needs it. And then with this, what we can do is drag this new variable out and plug it in to the B range, and it will automatically convert it. And now that we've got that, we can hit compile and save, and we can jump back to our interactable gathering. So what we want to do is before we actually do the branch check to actually end the gathering on true, we simply want to update the size. I'm going to right click and do get owner, and then with the new size here, I'm going to drag up and use our new interface update gather amount. I can plug this in, I can plug that into the gather amount, and I can plug it over here. The quantity available, I will just drag down here and reconnect this one so it looks neater. There we go. And now we can compile and save. So just for speed, I'm just going to drag a flower just in front of me here, just so we don't have to run all the way down there to test it. But what you'll see now, we should be able to run up to it, and every time we press and hold E, it should start shrinking for us. So you'll see if I run up to it now and I press E, it will start to shrink. There we go. Look at that. And then when it gets to the end, it should destroy it. There we go. It's now gone. If we check our inventory, we do officially have 5 of the flowers. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? However, there is a small glitch with it for some reason. The event tick seems to be running as soon as it's ticked, meaning you can just press it and let go. And that's not something we really want on this one. So what I'm actually going to do is I am going to substitute out the event tick for a timer, just because a timer will work with the starting delay, which will be a lot better for us. So after the is gathering, I'm going to drag off and do set timer by event. And then the time, we're going to put the gathering time in. I'm going to tick looping. The initial start delay, I'm going to put the gathering time in because we want it to wait the amount of gathering time every 3 seconds. Then I'm going to promote this timer to a variable called gathering timer. This is just so we can stop it. So on end interact, on our end gathering, I'm going to drag our gather timer in and simply call clear and invalidate timer. This will basically wipe the timer out. And we can get rid of the tick component. We don't need that anymore. And then back down here, we can add a custom event here. We'll call it gather, and I'll connect it up to the branch. And then up here, we can come down here. We can just do create event, and we can tell it we want to run the gather function like so. So if I drag up here on the gather and just add a print statement or gathering, we will be able to see every time it adds something to the inventory. So now if I run up and I hold E, you will see that the flower should start ticking down and our inventory will start ticking up. So there's 1 second, 2, 3 seconds, there's 2, and as you can see, the flower is going down, and as we are gaining more and more of these items in our inventory, eventually the flower will just disappear. Now this is a dead basic example of what you can do, but it's just showing that you really can kind of do anything you need to with it. So like even if I run down to these ones down here, oh yeah, it's definitely in the inventory as well, we've got 5, look. So if I run down to these ones down here, you can see I can start gathering them as well, 1, 2, and thanks to Lumen as well, the flowers are changing shadows as well, which looks really cool. And there you go, you can basically take any amount you want, and our inventory stocks up nicely. So there we go. You may experience a weird issue when you press interact that it will immediately just stop. It won't do anything. It'll do it the first time as soon as you press it, but then after that it won't do it anymore. The reason is you have to make sure on your input, so if I search for my interact input, you have to make sure you have 2 triggers on it, press and release. If you don't, as soon as you press it, Unreal immediately calls the completed event, which basically comes into the gathering interactable and says begin interact, because you've pressed it, and immediately end, so it will never actually tick up properly. So you've got to make sure you have 2 triggers on your events there, otherwise it won't work. So we pretty much have it coming on very, very nicely now that you can come and you can harvest from it, but there's still a few more bits we can do. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the annoying size. So for the blue flower, I will just set the max stack size to 99, so it'll all stack up into one nice one. And then it'd be nice if we could do some animations for it, so we can actually see him bending down and, you know, picking things up, axing, whatever you want. So what I'm going to do is I've already imported a gathering objects animation from Mixamo, where he bends down, he does some bits, and then he'll stand back up. So I don't want the bending down and the standing back up part. I figured we'll just loop it just for now, just for ease sakes, because I'm not an animator. So what I'm going to do is just when he's down and about to start picking, I'm going to right click and do remove frame, just so we're at the looping side, and then when he puts it in his back pocket, I will just right click, remove last frames. If you've got a better looping animation, it'll probably look really good. Actually, I could probably also get rid of everything after that as well, so it literally just looks like he's looping on the floor like that, and then as you're holding the key it will do it. So I'll come up to the top, create asset, create animation, current animation, animation data, and this is where we can export just this little bit of animation that we've got. I'll go to animations, polygon, elven, and I will do gathering objects loop. And now with this on our gathering blue flower, because this is the one where we actually want to play the animation, so on our gathering blue flower we just need to basically find somewhere to play the animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click the interactable, add event, and do on interacted. So this is when it's actually starting to interact, and then from here I will grab the interactor and I will do get body mesh, which is an interface that I've already added to my character so I don't have to cast to it. If I show you my BP character, which is my interface, all it is get body mesh returns the skeletal mesh component, and then I have applied it to my player. So when I come in for the interfaces, I can go to get body mesh, and I've just dragged in my body like so. Then back on here I can simply drag off this and do play montage, and then we won't be able to find a montage at the moment because we simply need to right click the loop and choose create animation montage, which I will call it am_gathering objects loop. I'm going to also open this while we're here and just make sure I tick loop, and I will save it, and I will also go back to the basic animation and make sure I've ticked loop as well, just in case. So it's looped on both. One last thing you need to do in order to make it loop is also come over to the montage sections, click on your default montage, and just make sure to tick this little box here and click default. You'll see a little round icon, which basically means it's going to loop itself. I don't know why you have to do both. And now back here we should be able to find our gathering objects loop like so. Now if we hit compile and save, now if we come and try it, you should see that we should be able to walk up to the flower, hold the E key, he'll bend down, he'll continuously loop to pick things up, and then he'll until the flower's gone. You can see we can now run up to the flower. If I hold the E key, he'll bend down and he'll start picking at it. Fantastic, he's looping, and then when we let go, So at the moment, it continuously loops, so that's not fully right. We need a way to tell it to stop looping the animation. At the moment, we don't have one, because when we tell it to play the montage, it will just continuously play it. So what we can do is we can right click the interactable, add event, and we can do on end interacted, and then just like we did before, we can put this down here and we can just play an animation to make him get back up. And by choosing that get back up animation, it will cancel out the looping one, and then once it finishes, the player will regain control. So what I'm going to do is come back down to my gathering objects animation here, and then I'm going to find the part where he stands back up, so just as he puts it in his pocket, so we'll say about there, and I'll right click and I'll just get rid of everything at the beginning, so just simply play that and stand up like so. We can probably reduce the length of this animation as well, because once he's stood up like that, I think we'll be okay to actually just give control back to the player, so we'll just cut the ending off. There we go, he puts it in his pocket after looping and stands up. So now we can save that. Now I can come back to create asset, create animation, current animation, and animation data. In the animations, we can open this up, polygon elven, and I will call this gathering end. And we can click OK. I can now come back to my gathering blue flower here, and I can make sure that my gathering end has a montage assigned to it. So I'll just call it AM for animation montage, gathering end, and then I can come inside here and type gathering end like so. So one slight mistake on my part, I do apologize. On end interacted is going to fire whether you actually interact with it or not. It will always fire when you focus in, focus out, because the interaction has ended. You've not just actioned it. So on interacted is if you actually interact with it, but we don't currently have anything to say if you have interacted with it and you've left. So what we can do for this real easily is we can come back into an interactable gathering and we can create an event dispatcher, and we'll just call it on interaction ended. And then what I'm going to do is after end gathering, where we set the component tick and we untick gathering, I will just call this right here, because we actually know at this point we have indeed gathered and we've stopped gathering. So I can hit compile and save. I can jump back to the gathering blue flower, and instead of doing this on end interacted here, instead when we actually begin interacting, I can drag in our interactable gathering just after we actually interact with it, and I'll drag this to the side slightly, and I will do assign on interaction ended, which is the new event dispatcher we've added. I will drag this up here, connect it up, and then I will just connect this event to this one here. So what we're actually doing now is we're saying as soon as we come in and we actually start interacting with it, find straight away and tell us when this specific gathering is ended. Once it's ended, just play the getting up animation. Otherwise, proceed on and play the looping animation. And then the only other thing it needs is the interactor. So I'll drag this off and do get interactor, which is a variable we've already stored on the interaction anyway, just like so. And then all we have to do just before we finish playing the montage is we just need to make sure that we unbind from here so it doesn't keep raising it as something we've done. I'm going to drag in the interactable gathering and just type unbind event from on interaction ended, and it'll ask what event we want to unbind, and it's just the event we're calling right here. So this way, as soon as we start interacting, we temporarily bind onto the interaction ended, so we know when we've actually interacted with it and ended the interaction. Then we'll play the looping animation. That will go off and do everything it needs in the event tick here, and then after it's finished or destroyed, it will call the ended, which will unbind the event so it doesn't run again, and then it will play ending animation. So we have one last little complexity with this system. On the interactable event graph, we are calling update gather amount, which goes back to our gathering blue flower here, and then what we're doing is we're checking if we've run out and then destroying it straight away before we're actually calling the end part here, so it never ends properly, it just instantly gets destroyed instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this get owner and update gather amount, and I'm actually going to drag it over here, connect this up to there and get rid of that, and put it all the way down here, and instead of calling it before we do anything, I'm actually just going to simply call it after here. So we'll call it from both places of the true or false, so either way it will update the gather amount, but as long as the end gathering plays, then it should play the final animation and not get us stuck in limbo of forever picking it up because the actor's getting destroyed. So just to reiterate, before we were checking the quantity straight away, and then on our quantity here, if we ran out of the actual gather amount, it would destroy the actor. And because the actor was destroyed, it then, when it came to the end gathering and told us to stand back up, it wouldn't run anymore because we'd already destroyed the actor. So we've just flipped it around. So this time it's saying, if you've run out, tell everybody we're finished, tell the event, tell the delegates, and then update the animation. And then you can destroy the flower object. So now I should be able to walk up to it. I can press and hold E to start gathering. If I let go, he'll stand up, which is perfect. If I press and hold it again until it runs out, we should stand up automatically because the flowers ran out of seeds or something wherever we're gathering. And the final one is there. He's put it away because we've gathered it. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. There is a cool gathering system which adds to the narrative inventory. So we've got 5 from that flower, and you can come to as many of them as you want one, and you can come and pick them at your own will. As soon as you let go, he will stand back up, or the flower will disappear because we've collected everything we can from it, and finally it is now gone and we've stood up. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? A proper gathering system. It's highly flexible because all you have to do is to create a child class of the gathering VPA gathering and then implement whatever logic you want into it. In this case, we have made the model shrink down in size and destroy when it's finished. We have also played an animation montage when they need to actually animate picking it or doing whatever they want. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any other requests for tutorials, please let me know. My name is Decryption, and I will see you next time.